Welcome to Deerfield Public Library Twitch channel. I'm Anne.
I'm Christina.
And welcome back to Lunchtime Listens. We're going to go way far back in time to one of the first novels, The Tale of Genji by Murasaki Shikibu. Have you read, what do you know about The Tale of Genji?
I know that it's the very first novel, and I had tried to read it in high school, and obviously it's a very big book, and I remember it was overdue, so I had to return it, so I never finished it.
So I read this in Japanese literature, so I have a lot of really weird information about this, and I really vividly remember like having read this in Japanese literature, and then that year was the year I went to Japan. This book was actually written between 1000 AD and 1010 AD, which is why it's widely considered the first novel. There are some other books that are kind of like considered in the running, but a lot of them are lost, apocryphal. Like they're like, oh, there was this Roman guy who wrote a story, and we have a synopsis. We don't have the actual story. And
the oldest one that has survived.
Right. Well, and we can say with some certainty that this is probably the oldest novel written by a woman. And Murasaki Shikibu was a pretty cool lady. Her name was not actually Murasaki Shikibu. Her name is Murasaki. Here's what we know about Murasaki Shikibu as I pull out my research. We know she was born sometime at the end of the 10th century, like the 970s. She was part of like a noble family, but not like super wealthy. And at the time, Chinese was like the language of government. It was the language of men. Because this was the point in time where Japan was wholesale importing all of Chinese culture into their own culture. And women were not supposed to learn kanji. They weren't supposed to learn Chinese. They wrote entirely in hiragana, which was considered a woman's script. That's like the native Japanese script. And they would write poetry and prose for themselves. There was a lot of like gossipy court stuff that women would write, but it was considered basically like the equivalent of like a trashy romance novel now. But Murasaki Shikibu, her dad was very like into education, and he wanted her to be educated too. So she was actually educated like she was a man. So she wrote in hiragana, like she wrote in the Japanese script, but she includes a lot of like Chinese references. There's a lot of poetry that will be in this book that is supposedly by Genji. So it's poetry in the male style, which was a Chinese style of poetry. So she's pretty cool. We like her a lot. She's great. Anyways. So the Tale of Genji, it's very long, but we're going to see how we do. And there's some confusion as to whether or not she wrote the entire book, because 2/3 of the way, our main character changes. So there's some suspicion that she wrote the first 2/3, and then the third book was written by her daughter, because it also came out way later.
Oh.
And it was like, yes, a continuation of Genji Monogatari. And you're like, okay. All right, so we're going to do chapter 1, Kiritsubo, the Paulownia Pavilion. Kiri means Paulownia tree, and Tsubo is a small garden between palace buildings. So Kiritsubo is therefore the name for the palace pavilion that has a Paulownia in its garden. The emperor installs Genji's mother there, so the readers have always called her Kiritsubo no Koi, or the Kiritsubo intimate, although the text does not. That's your fun fact. And I love this iteration because it gives you like the people who will appear in the chapter.
Oh, that's
I'm not going to read it out loud, but just know if you find this, it includes persons.
Persons.
In a certain reign, whose can it have been? Someone of no very great rank, among all his majesty's consorts and intimates, enjoyed exceptional favor. For the record, intimates are like concubines.
Okay.
So there's the wives, the consorts are the wives, and the intimates are the concubines.
Got it.
Those others who had always assumed that pride of place was properly theirs despised her as a dreadful woman, while the lesser intimates were unhappier still. The way she waited on him day after day only stirred up feeling against her, and perhaps this growing burden of resentment was what affected her health and obliged her often to withdraw in misery to her home. But His Majesty, who could less and less do without her, ignored his critics until his behavior seemed bound to be the talk of all. From this sad spectacle, the senior nobles and privy gentlemen could only avert their eyes. Such things had led to disorder and ruin, even in China, they said, and as discontent spread through the realm, the example of Yokihi came more and more to mind, with many a painful consequence for the lady herself, Yet she trusted in his gracious and unexampled affection and remained at court. So the beautiful Yokihi, who was infatuated with the Chinese emperor, so infatuated with the Chinese emperor that he neglected the state and it provoked a rebellion. So they're like, hey, you can't be too into her.
We still need you to do your job.
We still need you to do your job. The grand counselor, her father, was gone, and it was her mother, a lady from an old family, who saw to it that she should give no less to court events than others whose parents were both alive and who enjoyed general esteem. But lacking anyone influential to support her, she often had reason when the time came to lament the weakness of her position. His Majesty must have had a deep bond with her in past lives as well, for she gave him a wonderfully handsome son. This is like a thing. The prettier your child is, the more connected you were in past lives. Yeah.
I have a friend who just gave birth to a really, I was just saying, this baby looks real good for being a couple hours old. Guess she had a good past life.
Good past life connection with her significant other specifically.
Oh.
Their lives have been intertwined.
I'm going to let her know.
Yes, you better tell her. He had the child brought in straight away, for he was desperate to see him, and he was astonished by his beauty. His elder son, born to his consort, the daughter of the minister of the right, enjoyed powerful backing and was feted by all as the undoubted future heir apparent, but he could not rival his brother in looks, and his Majesty, who still accorded him all due respect, therefore lavished his private affection on the new arrival. What could go wrong? Her rank had never permitted her to enter his Majesty's common service, so she can't wait on the emperor like a servant. She could only come to him as a concubine, basically. Okay. His insistence on keeping her with him, despite her fine reputation and her noble bearing, meant that whenever there was to be music or any other sort of occasion, his first thought was to send for her. Real love match. Almost feel bad. Sometimes, after oversleeping a little, he would command her to stay on with him, and this refusal to let her go made her seem to deserve contempt. But after the birth, he was so attentive that the mother of his firstborn feared that he might appoint his new son heir apparent over her own. This consort, for whom he had high regard, had been the first to come to him, and it was she whose reproaches most troubled him, and whom he could least bear to hurt, for she had given him other children as well. Despite her faith in his Majesty's sovereign protection, so many belittled her and sought to find fault with her that, far from flourishing, she began in her distress to waste away. She lived in the Kiritsubo. His Majesty had to pass many others on his constant visits to her, and no wonder they took offense. So she lived further away than some of his other concubines.
So all see him walking.
Right. Well, and also the fact that there were others who were closer and he passed them by to go to the person who lived furthest away is considered basically a slight against the people. You're supposed to be I live closer, which means I'm higher in regard.
Right. He wants me right away.
You want me right here. But yeah, so they took offense because she was further away basically. On the far too frequent occasions when she went to him, there might be a nasty surprise awaiting her along the cross bridges and bridgeways. One that horribly fouled the skirts of the gentlewomen who accompanied her. Threw actual poop at her.
Oh.
Or who came forward to receive her. Or the victim of a conspiracy between those on either side. She might find herself locked in a passageway between two doors that she could not avoid and be unable to go either forward or back. This sucks. Seeing how she suffered from such humiliations, endlessly multiplied as circumstances favored her enemies' designs, His Majesty had the intimate long reside in the Korodan move elsewhere and gave it to her instead, for when he wanted to have her nearby. The one evicted nursed a particularly implacable grudge. Kind of understand why. In the child's third year, his father gave him a donning of the trousers, just as impressive as his firstborn's, marshalling for the purposes of all the treasures in the court repository and the imperial stores. This only provoked more complaints, but as the boy grew, he revealed such marvels of beauty and character that no one could resent him. He was just so beautiful that everyone was like, okay, bye. This is a common thread. Genji is so hot, he can get away with almost anything. God. He's just so beautiful that people are just like, about his beauty. The discerning could hardly believe their eyes, and they wondered that such a child should have ever been born. In the summer of that year, His Majesty's Haven, that's Genji's mom, became unwell, but he refused her leave to withdraw. He felt no alarm since her health had long been fragile, and he only urged her to be patient a little longer. However, she worsened daily until just 5 or 6 days later, she was so weak that her mother's tearful entreaties at last persuaded him to release her. In fear of suffering some cruel humiliation even now, she left the child behind and stole away. So if you get a chance to go to Tokyo, or there are some other museums that have pages of the original, because the original was done on scrolls, and there's just beautiful artwork in it, and it's just beautiful handwriting as well.
So did she do the artwork?
No, I think someone else did the artwork. This is such a famous book of Japanese literature that there's a ton of art. There's a 99% chance if you go in and you look at a piece of Japanese art in a museum that it is a scene from the Tale of Genji. Probably I think I was at the British Museum, and 60% of their Japanese stuff, I was that's Genji, that's Genji, that's Genji. Oh look, an actual page of Genji. So it's pretty famous. His Majesty, who could no longer keep her by him, suffered acutely to think that he could not even see her off. Imperial etiquette forbade the emperor to see her off because she was too ill to stay in the palace, and because it was bad luck for someone to die in the palace. And the emperor can't be seen with anyone who is sick in case that bad luck rubs off. There she lay, lovely and ever so dear, but terribly thin now, and unable to tell him of her deep trouble and sorrow because she lingered in a state of semi-consciousness, a sight that drove from his mind all notion of time past or to come, and reduced him simply to assuring her tearfully in every way he knew how much he loved her. When she still failed to respond, but only lay limp and apparently fainting, with the light dying from her eyes, he had no idea what to do. Even after issuing a decree to allow her the privilege of a hand carriage, he went into her again and could not bring himself to let her go. You promised never to leave me, not even at the end, he said, and you cannot abandon me now. I will not let you. She was so touched that she managed to breathe. This is another common thing, is when people are dying or feeling particular emotion, they express it in poetry. She was so touched that she managed to breathe. Now the end has come, and I am filled with sorrow that our ways must part. The path I would rather take is the one that leads to life. If only I had known. She seemed to have more to say, but to be too exhausted to go on, which only decided him, despite her condition, to see her through to whatever might follow. He consented only unwillingly to her departure when urgently reminded that excellent healers were to start prayers for her that evening at her own home. With his heart too full for sleep, he anxiously awaited dawn. He expressed deep concern even before his messenger had time to come back from her house. Meanwhile, the messenger heard lamenting and learned that just past midnight she had breathed her last, and he therefore returned in sorrow. This news put his Majesty in such a state that he shut himself away, wholly lost to all around him. He still longed to see his son, but the child was soon to withdraw, for no precedent authorized one in mourning to wait upon the emperor. The boy did not understand what the matter was, and he gazed in wonder at the sobbing gentlewomen who had served his mother and at his Majesty's streaming tears. Such partings are sad at the best of times, and his very innocence made this one moving beyond words. Also, a quick reminder, he's the most beautiful child to ever live. This is a continual thing. Now it was time to proceed with the customary funeral. Her mother longed with many tears to rise with her daughter's smoke into the sky, and she insisted on joining the gentlewomen in their carriage in the funeral cortege. What grief she must have known on reading Otagi, where the most imposing rite was underway. With her body plain to see before me, she said, I feel that she is alive even though she is not, and I will therefore watch her turn to ash to learn that she is really gone. She spoke composedly enough, but a moment later she was racked by such a paroxysm of grief that she nearly fell from the carriage. Oh, I knew it, the gentlewomen cried to each other, not knowing how to console her. A messenger came from the palace, followed by an imperial envoy who read a proclamation granting the deceased the third rank. It was very sad. His Majesty had never even named her consort, but it pained him not to have done so, and he had wished at least to raise her a step in dignity. Even this made many resent her further, but the wiser ones at last understood that her loveliness in look and bearing and her sweet gentleness of temper had made her impossible actually to dislike. Now that she's dead,
right,
we can realize that we may have been rude to her. It was his Majesty's unbecoming penchant for her, so his gentlewomen now understood, that had made some treat her with cold disdain, and they remembered her fondly for the warmth and kindness of her disposition. It was a perfect example of now she is gone. As the dreary days slipped by, His Majesty saw carefully to each succeeding memorial service. So a rite was performed every 7 days for the first 49 days after the death in order to guide the spirit of the deceased towards peace. And I think this was pre-Buddhism being like a big thing, so I think this was a Shinto rite, but I could be wrong about that. Buddhism came very quickly over too. The passage of time did so little to relieve his sorrow that he called none of his ladies to wait on him after dark, but instead passed day and night in weeping, and even those who merely witnessed his state found the autumn very dewy indeed. I like that as the autumn is dewy, as in he was crying a lot. She meant so much to him that even dead she is a blight on one's existence, summed up the sentiments of the Kokiden consort, as merciless as ever on the subject. I think the Kokiden consort is the woman who was the firstborn's mom.
Okay.
The heir apparent. So
Okay.
she's the one who's like
wife number one.
Wife number one, yeah, most important. The mere sight of his elder son would only remind His Majesty how much he preferred the younger, and he would then send a trusted gentlewoman or nurse to find out how he was getting on. At dusk one blustery and suddenly chilly autumn day, His Majesty, assailed more than ever by memories, dispatched the gentlewoman dubbed Yuge no Myobu to his love's home. Then, after she had left under a beautiful evening moon, he lapsed again into reverie. He felt her there beside him, just as she had always been on evenings like this when he had called for music, and when her touch on her instrument, or her least word to him, had been so much her own, except that he would have preferred, even to this vivid dream, her simple reality in the dark. Myobu had no sooner arrived and gone in through the gate than desolation touched her. The mother had kept the place up, despite being a widow, and she had lived nicely enough out of fond concern for her only daughter. But alas, now that grief had laid her low, the weeds grew tall and looked cruelly blown about by the winds, until only moonlight slipped smoothly through their tangles. She had Myobu alight on the south side of the house. At first she could not speak. "I keep wishing that I had not lived so long," she said at last. "And I am so ashamed now to see someone from His Majesty struggle all the way to me through these weeds." She wept as though it were truly more than she could bear. The Dame of Staff told His Majesty how desperately sorry for you she felt after her visit here, and how heartbroken she was, Myobu replied, "and even I, who pretend to no delicacy of feeling, understand what she meant all too well." Then, after composing herself a little, she delivered His Majesty's message. "For a time, I was sure that I must be dreaming. But now that the turmoil in my mind has subsided, what I still find acutely painful is to have no one with whom to talk over what needs to be done. Would you be kind enough to visit me privately? I am anxious about my son and disturbed that he should be surrounded every day by such grieving. Please come soon." He kept breaking into tears and never really managed to finish, but he knew all too well, as I could see, that to another he might not be looking very brave. Then I felt so much for him that I hurried off to you before I had actually heard all that he had to say. That means he burst into tears. Then Myobu gave her His Majesty's letter. Though tears darkened my eyes, the lady said, "by the light of his most wise and gracious words," and she began to read. I had thought that the time might bring consolations to begin lightening my sorrow, but as the passing days and months continued to disappoint me, I hardly know how to bear my grief. Again and again my thoughts go to the little boy, and it troubles me greatly that I cannot look after him with you. Do come and see me in memory of days now gone. He had written with deep feeling and had added the poem. Hearing the wind sigh, burdening with drops of dew all Miyagi more, my heart helplessly goes out to the little hug he found. Huggy is an autumn flowering plant, but she could not read it to the end. No one can fit it. They're also like depressed. They can't finish. "Now that I know how painful it is to live long," she said, "I am ashamed to imagine what the pine must think of me. And for that reason especially, I would not dare to frequent His Majesty's seat. It is very good indeed of him to favor me with these repeated invitations, but I am afraid that I could not possibly bring myself to go. His son, on the other hand, seems eager to do so, although I am not sure just how much he understands. And while it saddens me that he should feel that way, I cannot blame him. Please let His Majesty know these, my inmost thoughts. I fear that the child's dignity will suffer if he remains here, for I am a creature of misfortune, and it would be wrong for him to stay." The little boy was asleep. I had wanted to see him so that I could report on him to His Majesty, Miyobu said as she prepared to hasten away. But I am expected back. It must be very late by now. I would so like to talk to you longer, to lift a little of the unbearable darkness from my heart, she replied. Please come to see me on your own, too, whenever you wish. You always used to visit at happy, festive times, and seeing you here now on so sad an errand reminds one how very painful life is. We had such hopes for her from the time she was born, and my husband, the late Grand Counselor, kept urging me almost until his last breath to achieve his ambition for her and have her serve His Majesty. Do not lose heart and give up, he said, just because I am gone. So I did send her, although I felt that if she had to enter palace service without anyone to support her properly, it might be wiser to refrain. Well, yeah, she might have not experienced quite so much turmoil. Because what mattered to me was to honor his last wishes. Unfortunately, His Majesty became far more fond than it was right of someone who did not deserve that degree of favor, but she seems to have borne the disgraceful treatment she received and to have continued serving him until the growing burden of others' jealousy and the increasing unpleasantness to which she was subjected led her to break down as she did. And that is why I wish that His Majesty had not cared for her so much. I suppose I only say that, though, because her loss has plunged me into such terrible shadows. Her voice trailed off, and she wept. By now it was very late. His Majesty feels as you do, Miyobu assured her. I now understand, he says, how damaging my love for her really was, because the way I insisted, despite my better judgment, on favoring her to the point of scandal meant that it could not have gone on very long. I had no wish to offend anyone, and yet because of her I provoked resentment in those whom I should not have hurt, only to lose her in the end and to linger on, inconsolable, a sorrier spectacle now than I ever made of myself before. I wish I knew what in my past lives could have brought all this upon me. This is what he says again and again, and as he does so, he is never far from weeping. Miyobu talked on, and at last said tearfully, It is now very late, and I must not let the night go by without bringing His Majesty your answer. She hastily prepared to return to the palace. Very Midwest goodbye of them. This is the second time she's hastening to leave. The moon was setting in a beautifully clear sky. The wind had turned distinctly cold, and the crickets crying from among the grasses seemed to be calling her to weep with them, until she could hardly bear to leave this house of humble misery. Bell crickets may cry until they can cry no more, but not so for me. For all through the endless night my tears will fall on and on, she said. She could not get into her carriage.
Here, where crickets cry more and more unhappily in thinning grasses, you who live above the clouds bring still heavier falls of dew. I would soon have been blaming you, the answer came. This was no time for pretty parting gifts, and she gave Miyobu instead, in her daughter's memory, some things that she had saved for just such an occasion, a set of gowns and some accessories that her daughter had used to put up her hair. The young gentlewoman who had served her daughter were of course saddened by the loss of their mistress, but they missed the palace now they were used to it, and memories of His Majesty moved them to urge that his son should move there as quickly as possible. But she felt sure that people would disapprove if one as ill-fated as herself were to accompany him. And since she also knew how much he worried whenever he was out of sight, she could not bring herself to let him go. Miyobu felt a pang of sympathy when she found that His Majesty had not yet retired for the night. The garden court was in its autumn glory, and on the pretext of admiring it, he had quietly called into attendance 4 or 5 of his most engaging gentlewomen, with whom he was now conversing. Lately he had been spending all his time examining illustrations of The Song of Unending Sorrow. Sorry.
I mean, it's beautiful, but my favorite thing about this is it's so over the top. Have you ever heard the Song of Roland?
I think so.
It's like a medieval poem, and Roland is like the best warrior. It takes he dies at the end, spoiler alert, but it takes like 40 arrows to bring him down. And he's the coolest, and he hacks off all their heads as he's going. And this is like the same thing, but for romance, of like the emperor loved this concubine so much that he is reading only about sorrow.
And he hasn't stopped crying for days.
And also she gave birth to the most beautiful baby known to man.
So much extreme.
So much extreme.
All right.
Anyways, the Song of Unending
That's
Sorrow.
Right. His time examining illustrations of The Song of Unending Sorrow, commissioned by Emperor Uda, with poems by Issei and Tsurayuki. and other poems as well, in native speech or in Chinese, as long as they were on that theme, which was the constant topic of his
He
conversation.
literally can't shut up about how sad he is. Like, I appreciate it in that it's like deep love. It's clearly deep love. But man, I can see why the other wives were a little annoyed with him.
Right? I mean,
they weren't actually annoyed with her. They were annoyed with him. But
right.
He's the emperor, so they can't do anything to him.
Right.
So I'm like, I kind of understand why.
They're like, man, this guy's annoying, but we can't say that.
The only thing we can do is stop her from getting to him, which is why we're going to throw literal poop on her as she walks by.
That poor lady.
That poor lady. She didn't ask for this. Technically, her dad asked for this.
Bad dad.
Bad dad.
He questioned Miyobu carefully about her visit, and she told him in private how sad it had been. Then he read the lady's reply. She had written, "Her Majesty's words inspire such awe that I am unworthy to receive them. Confusion overwhelms me in the presence of sentiments so gracious." It's another poem. "Ever since that tree whose boughs took the cruel winds withered and was lost, my heart is sorely troubled for the little Hagi frond." That's that like autumn flower
plant.
that they're
and it's a real cute plant, I guess. So I think the little Hagi is supposed to be Genji.
Yeah, I would assume.
Because I'm assuming this whole thing is like a very Japanese way of dancing around the subject of like clearly Genji should go live at the palace.
Right.
That's going to be the best route for him, but we can't say it directly. So instead, we have to be like, how unfortunate I am. You know, I worry about what would happen if he stays here. I worry about what is happening over there. The little Hagi frond. We can't say outright, hey, Genji should come live with you.
Well, it's like, it's got to be his idea.
It's got to be the emperor, but clearly the emperor wants him there.
True.
But like, we can't, like, it's the Midwest, you got to say no 3 times before you accept the gift.
Like, okay.
It's the same vibe. It's the like, we can't say outright what we want to happen. We have to dance around the subject and make it sound like we had a very deep conversation about it, even though we both know
where it's
going. Yeah.
And so on, a rather distracted letter, although His Majesty understood how upset she still was and no doubt forgave her.
Just got some judgment on a mourning mom's letter.
He's struggling. Dude, you're crying all the time.
Yeah, he's the emperor. He can't.
He struggled in vain to control himself, despite his resolve to betray no strong emotion. A rush of memories even brought back the days when he had first known his love, and he was shocked to realize how long he had already been without her, when once he had so disliked her briefest absence. "I had wanted her mother to feel it was worthwhile to have her enter my service," he said, as the late Grand Counselor at his death had urged her to do.
Everyone knows about this deathbed thing.
What a shame. He felt very sorry. "At any rate, I should be able to do something for my son, as long as he grows up properly. She must take care that she lives to see it." Miyobu showed him the gift she had received. If only this were the hairpin that she sent back from beyond, he thought. But alas, it was not. He murmured, "Oh, that I might find a wizard to seek her out, that I might then know, at least from distant report, where her dear spirit has gone." A superb artist had done the paintings of Yokihi, but the brush can convey only so much, and her picture lacked the breath of life. The face, so like the lotuses in the Taiki Lake, or the willows by the Mio Palace.
Things like Mio. This is where my Japanese minor is coming in.
I know that I'm like, I have not ever taken Japanese. It was no doubt strikingly beautiful in its Chinese way, but when he remembered how sweet and dear his love had been, he found himself unable to compare her to flowers or birdsong. Morning and evening he had assured her that they would share a wing in flight as birds, or their branches as trees. But then she had died, and the resulting vanity of his promises filled him with unending sorrow. The sound of the wind and the calling of crickets only deepened his melancholy, and meanwhile he heard the Kokiden consort who had not...
Kokiden, yeah, very close.
Thanks.
Just be even.
Okay.
Just be
then
even.
I tried to say concert in a weird way, and I was like, oh no, my brain. Who had not come for so long now to wait on him after dark, making the best of a beautiful moon by playing music far into the night. He did not like it and wished it would stop.
She, if I remember correctly, she's gonna be a bad guy for a while, the Kokiden consort. they're setting her up very well for it.
I mean, this is a villain origin story.
Villain
right?
origin. To be fair, it is a villain origin story. Like, I was the first wife. I am of prime importance. I gave you the heir apparent. Oh, and then this.
All of this. Not even in life, but in death.
In death, it's still coming back to haunt me.
Yes.
Anyways, he didn't like that she was playing music, even though he loved Genji's mom's music.
Yeah. But he wanted this music to stop.
Stop.
Those gentlewomen and privy gentlemen who knew his mood found that it grated upon their ears. The offender, willful and abrasive, seemed determined to behave as though nothing had happened. The moon set. When above the clouds, tears in a veil of darkness hide the autumn moon, how could there be light below among the humble grasses? His Majesty murmured, his thoughts going to the lady whom Miyobo had recently left, and he stayed up until the lamp wicks had burned out. It must have been the hour of the ox, because he heard the right gate watch.
2 a.m. to 4 a.m. is the hour of the ox.
Reporting for duty. He then retired to his curtained bed, for he did not wish to make himself conspicuous, but still he could not sleep. He remembered when morning came, and it was time to rise. How once he had not even known that daybreak was upon him, and again he seemed likely to miss his morning session in council.
He is deep in grief. This boy needs therapy.
Yep.
Can we get a therapist for the emperor?
He only went through the motions of breaking his fast and took no greater interest in his midday meal, until all who served him grieved to see his state. Those in close attendance upon him, ladies and gentlemen alike, murmured anxiously about how disturbing it all was. Perhaps he had been fated to love her, but for him to have ignored the reproofs and the anger of so many, to have flouted for her sake the standards of proper conduct, and even now to ignore public affairs as he was doing, this, they all whispered, was most unfortunate, and they cited in this connection events in the land beyond the sea.
Is it in China? Yep.
Yeah.
It's that Yokichi again, the like really hot lady that the emperor basically like abandoned everyone for. Also, I need you to know that Thomas would like for us to support women's wrongs. So, justice for the Kokidan consort. Just a little sleep baby.
In time, the little boy went to join his father in the palace.
It just took a lot of roundabout talks.
He was turning out to be so handsome that he hardly seemed of this world at all.
Again, angel on earth, the hottest child alive.
And for his majesty, this aroused a certain dread. The next spring, when his majesty was to designate the heir apparent, he longed to pass over his elder son in favor of his younger, but since the younger lacked support, and since in any case the world at large would never accept such a choice, he desisted for the boy's sake and kept his desire to himself.
Good job. It's the first smart decision you've made, Emperor. He
could hardly go that far, people assured one another, no matter how devoted to him he may be. Though the Kokidan consort, I don't know why I keep saying like concert, was relieved. As for the grandmother, she remained inconsolable and wished only to join her daughter, which no doubt is why she too, to his majesty's boundless sorrow, at last passed away. The boy was then entering his 6th year. This time he understood what had happened, and he cried. Toward the end, she who had been close to him for so long spoke again and again of how sad she was to leave him. Now the boy was permanently in attendance at the palace. When he reached his 7th year, his majesty had him perform his first reading, which he carried off with such unheard of brilliance, I'm telling you, that his father was frankly alarmed.
Genji is gonna get away with so much stuff because he's beautiful, basically.
Surely none of you can dislike him now, he said. After all, he no longer has a mother. Please be nice to him.
Please be nice to him. The most beautiful boy, my beautiful boy.
When he took him to the Kokidan, the consort there led him straight through her blinds and would not release him, for the sight of him would have brought smiles to the fiercest warrior, even an enemy one. She had given his majesty 2 daughters, but by no stretch of the imagination could either be compared with him.
Hotter than all the women, too. He's just beautiful.
Nor did any other imperial lady hide from him, because he was already so charmingly distinguished in manner that they found him a delightful and challenging playmate. Naturally, he applied himself to formal scholarship.
Naturally.
But he also set the heavens ringing with the music of strings and flute. In fact, if I were to list all the things at which he excelled, I would only succeed in making him sound absurd.
You already do. Guess what? He was good at everything. He was the most beautiful child known to man. He's good at everything.
Brilliant.
Even the lady who hated his mother will not refuse to see him. He's still young enough he can go hang out with the ladies without calling them for specific reasons. And he's good at instruments and formal scholarship and speaking. He is good at everything. Oh, Genji.
During this time, His Majesty learned that a delegation from Koma included an expert physiognomist?
Physiognomist, yeah.
And since I don't either.
Let's look
They didn't put a note.
No, God forbid.
Something-
We have a note about that.
Something about the body?
Yeah.
Physiognomist.
Oh, it's one of those people who basically tries to tell stuff about people's character based on their facial features or expression.
Oh.
Oh, I'm sure he's going to love Genji.
And since it would have contravened Emperor Uda's solemn admonition to call him to the palace, he instead sent his son secretly to the Korokan. The right grand controller, charged with taking him there, presented him as his own.
I also need to know that he's written like a middle schooler self-fulfillment OC, and we love that for him. Correct.
The astonished physiognomist nodded his head again and again in perplexity.
Because he's so beautiful.
He has the signs of one destined to become the father of his people and to achieve the sovereign's supreme eminence, he said.
He's so beautiful, he deserves to be emperor.
And yet when I see him so, I fear disorder and suffering. But when I see him as the future pillar of the court and the support of all the realm, there again appears to be a mismatch. The controller himself was a man of deep learning, and his conversation with the visitor was most interesting. They exchanged poems.
Of course. No, that was like a thing you did. It's like giving someone your business card. You have to write a poem for your guest, and they write a poem for you.
Love it.
Poetry was super important to Imperial Japan at this time.
And when the physiognomist, who was soon to leave, made a very fine one expressing joy at having met so extraordinary a boy, together with sorrow upon parting from him,
Guess what else Genji's good at?
the boy composed some moving lines of his own, which the visitor admired extravagantly before presenting him with handsome gifts.
He's good at poetry, too.
The visitor, too, received many gifts, conveyed to him from His Majesty. News of this encounter got about, and as such news will, and although His Majesty never mentioned it, the Minister of the Right, the heir apparent's grandfather, wondered suspiciously what it might mean.
You know, like, I know there's a lot of flowery language in here, but it does such a good job at being like, here's the politics of court. Here's how it affects this kid. He didn't ask for this, but his mom was the emperor's favorite. He's super hot, so guess what? There's going to be some problems.
His Majesty was greatly impressed to find that the visitor's reading tallied with one that he had obtained in his wisdom through the art of physiognomy as practiced in Japan, and on the strength of which he had refrained from naming his son a prince. He therefore decided that rather than set the boy adrift as an unranked prince, unsupported by any maternal relative, he would assure him a more promising future, since after all, his own reign might be brief, by having him serve the realm as a commoner. And in this spirit, he had him apply himself more diligently than ever to his studies. It was a shame to make a subject of him, considering his gifts, but he was bound to draw suspicion as a prince, and when consultation with an eminent astrologer only confirmed this prediction, His Majesty resolved to make him a Genji.
Which is, I think, just like a gentleman, basically. Yeah, imperial family members had no surname. But after the early 9th century, some excess imperial sons were made commoners with the surname Minamoto. Genji means a Minamoto, basically. So anyone with the surname Minamoto was like a member of the imperial family. But like I can see why he's doing this because again, Genji is like super talented, super hot. People would definitely fall behind him as like the future emperor. It's gonna cause issues. So basically being like you're not a member of the imperial family anymore.
Yeah, so you're like out of any possible running.
Right, you're not in the running to be the emperor. But you can do other things because you're also really good at schoolwork.
Month after month, year after year, His Majesty never forgot his lost haven. After summoning several likely prospects, he sorrowfully concluded that he would never find her like again in this world. But then he heard from a dame of staff about another possibility, the fourth child of a former emperor, a girl known for her beauty and brought up by her mother, the empress, with the greatest care. Owing that emperor her office as she did, the dame had served the young lady's mother intimately as well, and so she had known her, too, from infancy. In fact, she saw her from time to time even now. In all my 3 reigns of service at court, I have seen no one like your majesty's late haven, she said, but the princess I refer to has grown to be very like her. She is a pleasure to look at.
This is how he's going to get over his grief.
His Majesty approached the mother with great circumspection, eager to discover the truth of this report. She received his proposal with alarm, because she knew how unpleasant the heir apparent's mother could be, and she shrank from exposing her daughter to the blatant contempt with which this consort had treated her Kiritsubo rival. So it was that she passed away before she could bring herself to consent.
That's not right. Let me take some time to think about this. Dies.
Once the daughter was alone, His Majesty pressed his suit earnestly, assuring her that she would be to him as a daughter of his own.
That's weird. That's weird, dude.
Frankenstein.
That's weird.
Her gentle...
You know he's going to bring her in as like a concubine.
I know.
But, yeah, don't say daughter.
Yeah.
That's weird.
This gentlewoman, those properly concerned with her interests, and her elder brother, His Highness of War,
Highness of War! I love that.
I know! I'm like,
Highness of War!
What a title.
What a title.
All agreed that she would be far better off at the palace than forlorn at home, and they therefore insisted that she should go. She was called Fujitsubo. She resembled that other lady to a truly astonishing degree.
Wild.
But since she was of far higher standing, commanded willing respect, and could not possibly be treated lightly, she had no need to defer to anyone on any matter. His Majesty had clung all too fondly to his old love, despite universal disapproval, and he did not forget her now. But in a touching way, his affection turned to this new arrival, who was a great consolation to him. None of His Majesty's ladies could remain shy with the young Genji, especially the one he now saw so often, because he hardly ever left his father's side.
Oh, I forgot about this.
All of them took pride in their looks, no doubt with good reason, but they were no longer in the first blush of youth, whereas the new princess was both young and charming, and Genji naturally caught glimpses of her, although she did what she could to keep out of his sight. He had no memory of his mother, but his youthful interest was aroused when the dame of staff told him how much the princess resembled her, and he wanted always to be with her so as to contemplate her to his heart's content.
I'm sure your dad's really going to like that.
It's getting weird.
Weird.
His Majesty, who cared so deeply for both of them, asked her not to maintain her reserve. I am not sure why, he said, but it seems right to me that he should take you for his mother. Do not think him uncivil. Just be kind to him. His face and eyes are so like hers that your own resemblance to her makes it look quite natural. Genji therefore lost no chance offered by the least flower or autumn leaf to let her know in his childish way how much he liked her. His Majesty's fondness for her promoted the Kokiden consort to fall out with her as she had done with Genji's mother, until her old animosity returned and she took an aversion to Genji as well.
For a while, Genji she liked.
Right.
And then she was like, wait a minute.
You. Genji's looks had an indescribably fresh sweetness, one beyond even her highness's celebrated, and to His Majesty, peerless beauty, and this moved people to call him the Shining Lord.
The Shining Lord! His Highness of War and the Shining Lord.
Love it.
New children's book series.
Since Fujitsubo made a pair with him, and His Majesty loved them both, they called her the Sunlight Princess.
I love these names.
I know, these are great. His Majesty was reluctant to spoil Genji's boyish charm, but in Genji's 12th year, he gave him his coming of age, busying himself personally with the preparations and adding new embellishments to the ceremony, lest the event seem less imposing than the one for the heir apparent.
You probably should make it less imposing.
Done some years ago in the Shishinden, and lest anyone go amiss. What? Okay. He issued minute instructions for the banquets to be offered by the various government offices and for the things normally provided by the port repository and imperial granary, eliciting from them perfection in all they supplied.
Nothing but the best for my boy.
He had his throne face east from the outer, eastern chamber of his residence, with the seats for the young man and his sponsor, the minister, before him. Genji appeared at the hour of the monkey. His Majesty appeared to regret that Genji would never look again as he did now, with his hair tied in twin tresses, and his face radiant with the freshness of youth. The Lord of the Treasury and the Chamberlain did their duty. The Lord of the Treasury was plainly sorry to cut off such beautiful hair, and His Majesty, who wished desperately that his haven might have been there to see it, needed the greatest self-mastery not to weep.
It's now been like 12 years since she died. Also, yeah, this was like a thing. They didn't get their hair cut until they turned 12.
All present shed tears when, after donning the headdress and withdrawing to the anteroom, Genji then reappeared in the robes of a man and stepped down into the garden to salute his sovereign. His Majesty, of course, was still more deeply moved, and in his mind he sadly reviewed the past when the boy's mother had been such a comfort to him. He had feared that Genji's looks might suffer once his hair was put up, at least while he remained so young, but not at all. He only looked more devastatingly handsome than ever.
I was worried cutting his hair would make him look ugly, but bad news! He looks even better. Even better!
By Her Highness, his wife, the sponsoring minister, had a beloved only daughter in whom the heir apparent had expressed interest, but whom, after long hesitation, he felt more inclined to offer to Genji instead.
Oh, that's gonna go well.
When he had sounded out the emperor's own feelings on the matter, His Majesty replied, "Very well, she may be just the companion for him, now that he seems no longer to have anyone looking after him." And this had encouraged His Excellency to proceed. Genji withdrew to the anteroom and there took the very last seat among the princes. While the assembled company enjoyed their wine, His Excellency dropped hints to him about this marriage, but Genji was at a bashful age and gave him no real response.
He's 12. He's 12, and this full-grown adult man is dropping hints about how he wants to marry his daughter to him, and he is not catching the hints.
Then a lady from the Office of Staff sent His Excellency a message from His Majesty requiring his presence, and His Excellency obeyed forthwith.
You know, I got a really beautiful daughter. And Genji's like, why are you telling me?
He's like, cool.
Cool, yeah, he's 12.
One of His Majesty's gentlewomen took the gifts from his own hands to bestow them on His Excellency. They included, according to custom, a white oversized woman's gown and a set of women's robes. On handing him the wine cup, His Majesty gave pointed expression to his feelings. Into that first knot to bind up his boyish hair did you tie the wish, that enduring happiness be theirs through ages to come? In that very mood I tied his hair with great prayers, bound henceforth to last, just as long as the dark hue of the purple does not fade.
I do love the poetry.
His Excellency replied before stepping down from the long bridge to perform his obeisance. There he received a horse from the left imperial stables and a perched falcon from the Chamberlain's office.
Great gifts, just saying. A horse and a falcon, 10 out of 10.
The princess and the senior nobles then lined up below the steps, each to receive his gift. The delicacies in cypress boxes and the fruit baskets had been prepared for the emperor that day by the Right Grand Controller, at His Majesty's own command. There were so many rice dumplings and so many chests of cloth, certainly more than when the heir apparent came of age, that there was hardly any room for them all. It was, in fact, Genji's ceremony that displayed truly magnificent liberality. That evening, His Majesty sent Genji to the minister's residence, where His Excellency welcomed him and gave the ensuing rite a dazzling brilliance.
Oh, it's the wedding. Yep.
Oh.
Owie.
Oh, okay.
So he literally comes of age, he's 12, and then that night, he has probably no idea what's happening. He goes and is basically married off to this girl.
All right. Important day. Fun-filled day.
Fun-filled day. At least he's hot.
He's 12, Anne.
He's 12. I know. Don't worry. He'll become older in the next chapter.
The family found Genji preternaturally attractive.
So the thing is, they keep mentioning how hot he is. spirits love very attractive people. So it's actually like if you're too attractive, you could be like basically taken into the spirit world. So they're all like, "Wow, he's so hot! Can't believe he's still here!" Like,
can't believe he's still
can't believe
here.
you're like Faye being basically stolen away. Anyways, preternaturally attractive.
Despite his still being such a child,
Just became a man today. He got bar mitzvahed basically.
but His Excellency's daughter, somewhat older, thought him much too young and was ashamed that he should suit her so poorly. His Excellency enjoyed His Majesty's highest regard, and the princess who had borne him his daughter was moreover His Majesty's full sister. Both were therefore of supreme distinction, and the Minister of the Right cut a poor figure now that Genji had joined them, too, despite being destined one day to rule the realm as the grandfather of the heir apparent. His Excellency had many children by various ladies. By Her Highness he had, apart from his daughter, a very young and promising Chamberlain Lieutenant, whom the Minister of the Right had wished to secure as a son-in-law, even though he was hardly on good terms with the young man's father, and whom he had therefore matched with his beloved fourth daughter. He treated the young man just as well as Genji's father-in-law treated Genji, and the two sons-in-law got on perfectly together. Genji was not free to live at home, for His Majesty summoned him too often. In his heart he saw only Fujitsubo's peerless beauty. Ah, he thought, she is the kind of woman I want to marry. There is no one like her. His Excellency's daughter was no doubt very pretty and well brought up, but he felt little for her because he had lost his boyish heart to someone else. Indeed, he had done so to the point of pain. Now that Genji was an adult, His Majesty no longer allowed him through Fujitsubo's curtains to be with her as before. Whenever there was music, he would accompany her koto on his flute. This and the faint sound of her voice through the blinds were his consolations, and he wanted never to live anywhere but in the palace. Only after waiting upon His Majesty for 5 or 6 days might he now and again put in 2 or 3 at His Excellency's. But he was so young that the minister did not really mind, and he treated his son-in-law generously. His Excellency, yes. I'm losing the thread. His Excellency selected the least ordinary among the available gentlewomen for Genji's service. These entered
Wait,
with
what?
the
least
ordinary.
So he chose the prettiest women. Okay.
Yeah.
Just making sure.
Only the best will do.
I also just is there something weird about your father-in-law who married you off to his daughter choosing the prettiest ladies for your service?
Yes, it's all weird.
It feels weird. It's a weird move.
I mean, he seems to really like him, you know. He
does really like him.
He treated him generously.
And at 12, I'm guessing, marriage is not, it's not like they were, now consummated.
Right, yeah.
This was when you're, maybe 18, we'll figure this out.
Right. Yeah, like how they would do, royalty in Europe
Royal
and
weddings,
stuff.
Yeah, and he is a prince. I mean, not prince, he's Genji, but,
He's Genji.
He's Genji. Anyways, so he brings the pretty ladies move on.
These entered with him into his favorite pastimes and looked after him very well. His residence at the palace was the Kiritsubo, as before, and His Majesty kept his mother's gentlewomen together so as to have them serve him in turn. He also decreed that the office of upkeep and the office of artisans should rebuild his mother's home, which they did beautifully. The layout of the trees and garden hills was already very pleasant, but with much bustle and noise they handsomely enlarged the lake. Genji kept wishing with many sighs that he had a true love to come and live with him there. They say that his nickname, the Shining Lord, was given him in praise by the man from Koma.
That's the end of chapter 1. So that's the beginning of the Tale of Genji. What did you think so far?
It's interesting. I do love court intrigue.
Yeah, and this is
stories.
Big court intrigue. That's basically 90% of the book is and Genji was super pretty and he was really good at everything and he gets away with stuff because of it. And I think they're setting some stuff up really well, the fact that he really likes the concubine or the princess who looks like his mom.
Yeah.
And he wishes he had a true love to bring home with him instead of His Excellency's daughter. That's going to come back. So yeah, that's the Tale of Genji, chapter 1. I think passes the sniff test so far. But yeah, so join us next week for more Tale of Genji. Once again, I'm Anne.
I'm Christina.
And have a great rest of your day.
Bye.